Levels. There are now some levels. Hello. Okay, yes. Kat, what was that you were saying?
I was just saying, welcome to Thursday Night Live, and I was wondering how everyone could hear us. Levels. There are now. But yes, all right. We've got people can hear us.
Confirmation on the levels.
How about Pegah and Connor? Could you just say something as we're testing audio for folks?
This is a mic test.
Hi there.
Yeah, hello.
All right, folks in the audience, can you hear Pegah and Connor?
Let's throw that out there and move right along.
Yeah. Everyone's good. Great. So yes, welcome to Thursday Night Live, a live streaming series from the Mackenzie Art Gallery. I'm Kat Blimke.
I'm Jonathan Carroll.
And we're digital programs coordinators at the gallery. And so on Thursday nights at 7 p.m., we partner with artists, curators, and educators to deliver workshops, panels, or screenings that reflect on how to view, how to make, and how to enjoy digital art. You, the audience watching, play a key role in how this happens. During today's discussion, you'll be able to ask questions by typing into the chat box. The chat is located on the right-hand side of the video if you're watching through desktop, and it's underneath the video if you are watching on a tablet or mobile device. The chat is an important feature of any live stream because this is where you can join in. During the stream, we encourage you to ask any questions, whether you are watching on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitch. If you can't seem to be able to access the chat, make sure you are logged into the platform that you are using to view the stream. We encourage you to ask questions at any time during the stream, and we'll try our best to answer them. And you can use the chat to also talk with other audience members who are watching, but we just keep in mind that there's always another person at the end of that username.
So over the past few weeks on Thursday Night Live, we've been talking with artists and curators and critics about making art using digital technology and on digital platforms. And tonight we're going to talk about who controls that technology. So the moderation of our digital environment is a structure that includes peoples and lands spanning the whole globe. And we'd like to begin tonight by acknowledging the land that we are gathered on for this live stream, which is Treaty 4 territory. It's the homeland of the Cree, the Saulteaux, the Lakota, the Nakota, the Dakota, and the Métis people. You are gathered wherever you are out there. We're joined today for this conversation about content moderation with Pegah Vaezi, and Connor Turland to talk about commonly used platforms and how they can limit artists and creators. Hi, both of you. Why don't you tell us a little about yourselves?
Sure, yeah. Well, I'm a designer and a curator. Just a curious person, I guess. And I come from the arts background. I also I'm really interested in co-creating spaces for inclusive discourses. So I really became interested in the past couple of years in content moderation, just like the presence of art in the digital space. And that led me to the thesis I worked on and a symposium I curated last year related to content moderation in digital sphere. And I'm really excited to share what I've learned and just have a conversation with you all about that. And my partner, Connor, we run a design and development studio together, and I want him to introduce himself as well.
Sure. So my name is Connor Turland, and so we're in Ontario right now, and this is where I was born and raised, and I studied computer science in university, but then dropped out to kind of move on and live in the world of kind of web development and generally like software development. And like from my passions, since high school, been very strongly environmentally, kind of an environmental advocate. And so that's a strong piece, and generally very interested in systems thinking, systems change, really understanding things from a systems theory and systems thinking perspective. All my mentors and folks who influence me heavily are all very kind of systems thinkers. That's kind of really what I've been steeped in, and so I like to think about systems change, big systems change, some of the big systems, waste, energy, food systems. Really interested in that level of complexity, and I've always been interested in building software that connects into and aims to impact things at that societal, social, and global, hopefully, level. And yeah, we're running a business together, doing design and development, and I was part of the symposium, bringing some of my experience with technology that empowers people into the context of the workshops and the symposium, and talking about in particular the history of peer-to-peer technology, which is something I'm really interested in. So what is the potentials of peer-to-peer technology? It's probably the key thing that interests me, and is really I hope we get to talk about.
We're just going to take 1 second to switch our audio. Our classic Bluetooth headphones not working problem. So just 2 seconds.
The audience can hear you though, loud and clear.
I am la da da. This is what you tune in for, to see us deal with audio.
Live.
This is live.
This is live.
So this is also a tech support live stream, a live stream about making Zoom work. Okay, and speaker out, and
oh great.
no, we are good. I just have to make sure the audience can hear you by boosting up that. Okay, awesome. That's so much better. Awesome. Okay, so yeah, what I was just sort of jumping off what we were what you were just talking about, and sort of what I'm excited about learning from you both tonight in the context of things we've been talking about on this live stream is like, as an artist, when you're working with digital technology, especially, often the sort of like you're thinking about the utopian possibilities versus the dystopian realities of technology, which I think we're going to talk about that dystopian side, but I'm also really excited to talk about some of the utopian possibilities, especially from the more technical side of things, because I think as artists we engage with things aesthetically a lot, and a lot of the people we've been talking to have been engaging with things aesthetically, but for me it will be very helpful to have a bit more of a robust understanding of like what, even just like what sort of a utopian imagining we could have when it comes to digital technology.
Cool, yeah. So tonight we were thinking about kind of giving a quick summary of like content moderation in the digital space, and then seeing how it functions mainly in democratic societies in North America, because it's more visible. authoritarian societies, like, you know, censorship and surveillance and how they content moderate. But I really was interested in like looking close to home, like, you know, and seeing how it actually functions here. And then how its relationship with in a global scale too, like how we are contributing to that. So I just wanted to also give a quick kind of like background around like how I became interested, like what's the direction that I took to came up with this research. Is that because I grew up in Iran as an artist, and so like really saw and faced a lot of like content moderation system out there. And when I moved back to the States after 19 years, I was interested in kind of creating a dialogue between the two cultures, like some artistic dialogue between the two. So I saw the digital space being a potential ground for that, to make that possible. At the same time, realizing that in the digital space, we also are facing challenges related to moderation of content.
Well, and wasn't it the case that when you moved to the U.S. and then you would talk about these things, and then people would sort of point you back to Iran, like as kind of a case study, and that kind of bothered you, like that it felt like it was all pointing fingers and that it wasn't reflecting on this.
Yeah, it didn't
here.
feel that reflective of like what's happening here to me. So I thought we first need to know what's happening here within our digital system here, so that we can better make sense of it. So given that background and the invisibility, the rather invisibility of it, I just wanted to kind of like open up some conversation around what kind of systems content moderation functions through. And I want to focus on censorship and surveillance, and I want to give a quick history of how it emerged, like in the digital space through the internet, and then seeing examples of that, and then at the end, I want to bring some attention to some of the artistic approaches that's happening, that feels like hopeful and empowering in the artistic discourse. So how about starting with a quick kind of historical background about that?
Yeah. You want me to share?
Yeah.
So we thought that it was interesting to start with, I'm not sure who would recognize this catalog, but the Whole Earth catalog was kind of a revolutionary catalyst, cultural catalyst that was kind of centered in the Bay Area and San Francisco. Stuart Brand was the kind of one of the instigators, and it was the picture is quite relevant to the whole story of the whole thing, because it was around the time that astronauts first made it out kind of into space, and that they decided that they should turn the camera around and not just focus on the stars, but actually reflect back onto Earth and take that picture of Earth. And that was what sparked, from an environmentalist standpoint, that was actually what sparked the whole Earth Day movement. But just that these were the same people who actually were looking at cultural revolution, looking towards the future, and and a very high concentration of technologists, obviously, or the people on the kind of cutting edge of computer programming, computer science, and technology in general, and Silicon Valley, and yeah, they were kind of dreaming big about the future and dreaming big about technology. And you mentioned utopian visions, and that actually was a huge part of this phase, was as people were kind of right on that edge of discovering and starting to build internet networking infrastructure. I mean, there was military involvement, and it kind of spun out from there. But as people got their hands on it, they saw the revolutionary potential of this to create a networked world, and the potentials of a networked world to address issues like climate change or global warming. This was like early kind of moments of having those kinds of realizations of what kinds of impacts and challenges we were going to face as a society and as a globe going forward. And those were really kind of starting points for the internet. The many people who joined the internet or joined kind of forums and that kind of thing, it was all extremely optimistic. There was a huge optimism about where this was going, what was the potential of the internet to connect people and to create like massive ripple effects of change across the globe because of instant connectivity, which at that time was like blowing their minds.
Yeah, they were like kind of promising an open, like neutral and community empowering space. That was like the utopian vision that they had.
Mm-hmm.
But then what happened? Like years that passed, they realized that it's a little bit like distant from what they were imagining as a truly democratic information society. Like as users start like creating and generating content on the internet, there were like lots of questions that were raised. First was
is that?
Yeah, we can keep it here. So like, it was first the copyright, for example, in the United States, that began to extend liability of intermediaries in a significant way. So these intermediaries like found a huge role on the internet, like to connect people and to provide a space.
Yeah, I wonder if you can say like intermediaries, what you mean by intermediaries, just an example.
Yeah, for example, it started like from, I don't know, like blog spaces and kind of like, I don't know, early social platforms like MySpace and all that. Yeah. If you remember that, it was like a long time ago. So first it was copyright, and then there were other issues that like were brought up, like online harassment and pornography and hate speech and all of that. These all like led into changes in policies and creation of policies. So it's very important to talk about these policies, talk about how law played a huge role in how today our internet functions. Mm-hmm. For example, with the copyright, the DMSA, or the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, that went into effect in 2000. It really like opened like lots of questions and lots of implications for the users on internet. And then what happened was that in 1996 there was a law that got into place. The section is called Section 230, Telecommunication Decency Act, DCA, that became really important for the platforms that emerged as these intermediaries on the internet, which was talking like, so the impacts of it was that it removed the liability of the content that was generated on the platform for these owners of the platforms, and so they were liable for whatever content that the users put in the platform. At the same time, it gave them immunity to moderate the content that exists in their platform. So it's like double benefit for them. Also at the same time, so it's like a double-edged sword thing, because it also like kind of created a space for so-called freedom of expression, and like a safe haven for platforms to exist, to be based on in the US, so that they can benefit from this law.
Yeah, which I found very kind of just like when you look at the international kind of playing field, it's often tricky for us to. I mean, we know this, but just based on the sort of how the internet feels like it's everywhere and nowhere at the same time, we can forget where the headquarters of all of these tech companies that run our platforms are based, and the significant majority operate in the U.S. and it's not a coincidence, but and we have to understand some of the legal the environment in the legal space in a way to understand why they were able to grow bigger, and also to have different laws that govern them than if they were to exist elsewhere in the world. Mm-hmm. Now you've got we're only starting to see international legislation come into effect, like where Google and the likes, they have to abide by, for example, the what was the
European one?
The European GDPR legislation. And so back in the fall, we saw all the tech companies sending us updates to their terms and conditions, and that was because Europe was rolling a new legal stuff into effect, and because they operate globally, they now have to actually be compliant with Europe's stuff too. But that kind of thing is relatively new. Pretty much they've been operating, US companies have been operating in a kind of like, they can reach into the whole globe but be governed only by American law.
So
Can I ask a question about that? So how do you the laws that were created to govern the internet, especially initially, how do you think they related to people like Stuart Brand, or the sort of initial like proponents of the internet and of virtual space as utopia? How do you think those laws fit with their vision in terms of creating this sort of like free and open cyberspace platform?
The relationship between the in particular the legal, you said, like when the legal stuff was coming.
So I'm thinking like just specifically like this what we're looking at now on the slide is the something that in one way favors a certain idea of free speech. So I'm just wondering if that would have sort of a law like this would be seen by the like sort of early Silicon Valley guys as being something that supported their vision of this like
that's a good question in terms of like how they related to this particular one, I can imagine that, like, in terms of the general rollout of legislation to govern it, I think there's been quite a few battles fought to defend, internet freedoms and sort of neutrality. That was one of the things I think we were kind of bordering on touching on, was net neutrality, and I can imagine that this one in particular didn't do a lot to kind of shake up those perspectives, like, because it didn't necessarily. It seemed that this one actually provided not a lot of backlash on what people were going to be able to do or say, like, online. It mostly covered the behinds of the tech companies from liability.
It wasn't visible
forward.
enough. Yeah.
Right.
And then the other thing you want to talk about is how, like, only in the past 2 or 3 years we kind of like having this, like, more of a public awareness around the content moderation that's going on in the social platforms, especially the biggest ones. But I think the question here you would ask, like, so with this CDA 230, like, why then, like, they don't have to, they're not liable for the user content, but why they would want to still moderate the content, right? So one big thing to note here is that most of these major communication and social digital platforms are run and owned by private companies. So that's very important. And they're mainly based in the US, as we mentioned. But they're used by users across the globe. So it's an important thing to notice. And also, their business model is that they want to keep, they depend on advertising or gathering user data or a combination of both. And it's not only for economic reasons that they need to make the public happy or something like that, but also they fear of losing their public brand, and users leaving their ecosystem. That might be more of a incentive for them to do these, like, which we will talk about, like these systems that they've come up with to monitor the content that usually is through public pressure or the government at points that leads them to do that, like at a larger scale.
Yeah, it's usually like to do with keeping face. Like there'll be like the public pressure instances, just like these patterns where there's some particular thing online and they receive a lot of a concentrated amount of backlash. They feel the backlash against a particular thing, and then they'll take that particular thing down, and that's part of how they just do it. It's kind of like a whole test bed. It all goes out, and then whatever the people don't like. But that's part of the difficult thing too. It's like they get to make the calls. They are the arbiters, and they're making. The question is, what are they making the calls according to? And that's what you're pointing at, is that they make the calls according to whether they think that the content that people are seeing is off-putting.
Mm-hmm. Because they're not being held responsible to any larger body.
No, exactly.
No, right.
Except for very few exceptions, right? Like that the government might say like look, this is like, like terrorist, for example, content or something like that might deal with actual like governmental law. But
yeah. Well, that's part of what they do too, is they create their policies. Like they have they have policies. What they say about their platforms is okay and what's not. The question about policies is how is it enforced, because there's millions of posts, millions or billions of posts. And so even if they've got these policies, technically there's no filter when you hit post. Like, it's not like it checks it before you post it. It's post checked. It's like anyone can post anything they want at any time, no barrier. And so it's a flood. And then the question is, how are they going to enforce their policies? Which things are they going to choose to follow up on from their policies? Which things are they going to let go? And that's entirely up to their own sort of personal or private arbitration.
Yeah. I just wanted to go back to the question of what do we mean when we say content moderation. We're talking about content moderation. The way I've been thinking about it in my research is about content as speech, as expression. And so the process of content moderation, reshaping narratives through moderating of the speech, regulation of the speech, and regulation of expression. And so by thinking about it from that lens of like reshaping narratives, we can think about how this mechanism of content moderation can impact or is impacting the creative discourse, especially because when we talk about art and creative content, we're talking about the gray areas through which
The gray area.
As you can see, like from this picture, art has dealt with content moderation for a long time. You know, it's not new in any sense. Especially because, like in art, since art often deals with like sexuality, like or political content and things that might be kind of like in the edge of our human conception at points, it kind of falls into those holes where through the mechanisms of content moderation, it can really hurt. I just wanted to read this quote by Julia Farrington, which is, "Artistic freedom of expression is a tricky right because it supports artists to investigate the most sensitive areas of society and ask the difficult questions. Perhaps we are losing our appetite for disagreement and debate in the arts." So we wanted to kind of like, when we talk about the mechanisms of content moderation in the digital space, especially digital platforms, I wanted to mention three main systems. They do that. And so the first one is through algorithms. The second one is through user or community flagging. And the third one, which we might less familiar with, is the content moderation, commercial content moderation workers. So I just wanted to touch on those a little bit and see how they impact the content. I can't go back. It's fine.
Sometimes I wonder how many people know what an algorithm is.
Yeah,
Or
it's
what the
kind of
word-
like we
or
can
what the
have a
word,
whole
like,
conversation
algorithm
about
is.
that. I know, like
We
we're
like,
very,
yeah, we like to keep it as 101 here as possible. So if you're down
If
to
you're
just
into that, yeah.
quickly describe, as,
well, like just like into like one of these, and it would take like an
yeah.
hour.
So say them again, the three again. So
Yeah.
the first one's algorithms. The second one is user flagging.
User or community, they call it community flagging, and then the third one is a commercial content moderation workers, CCM workers. And they are interrelated at the same time. So why they like these platforms, this social, especially we're talking about social platforms, they came up with these three solutions or methods or whatever you call it, is that because of the problem of scale, right? We talked about like the massive amount of content that is generated every second, right? At the same time,
and the fact that it's not filtered pre-posting.
Exactly, it's not filtered pre-posting. It's different from the traditional media, which is like you have an editorial, for example, team, right? Or have like in live streams, you have like the delay.
Yeah. I'm thinking of like you see or you hear stories of like someone cursing on like Saturday Night Live, and they have to like they always run the feed 4 seconds behind when it actually happens, so they can cut it at any time. But yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, a lot in Iran in sports matches, like just like cut through the audience image. So the problem with scale, as we talk about, which is very different from traditional media, and at the same time the qualitative complexity of the content that exists. So the scale makes self-governance almost impossible, right? And what happens here is that it's also more invisible because of these systems. It's like very difficult to see, like compared to like how content is moderated through the editorial team.
Right.
You just assume everybody on my Facebook, it must be very nice people, or there's nothing, there's no scary images that ever show up there.
Well, and the other thing, like the opaqueness of it, like for example, and of the algorithms, like how the fact that when you go to your Facebook feed, it's sort of it's just a collection, you know, it's just kind of a smattering of a post from here and a post from there. But what you don't know is you only know which posts you're shown, and you don't know which ones you're not shown, and you don't know a post that showed up there yesterday and now it doesn't show up there today. I don't even notice that because it's a constantly rotating feed, and that means that I don't know what I would have seen yesterday, or you know, a post that was up yesterday is now taken down, but no one is seeing everything, so there's an invisibility.
And you don't know how they function. Like for example, talking about algorithms, and I don't know how much we want to like go into it, but the other name for it is machine automation. Carl, do you want to like a little bit explain how it functions?
Sure. The thing with the algorithms, I think there used to be, like the last couple of years has seen a spike in a new type of, you know, probably everyone is probably caught on to the wave or the hype of artificial intelligence. But to describe what people call artificial intelligence is often very much an exaggeration. A more accurate kind of term for what people are calling artificial intelligence is machine learning, which is the ability for a machine to basically level up at one of the things that humans and human brains are good at, which is pattern recognition. And the thing is that they don't learn pattern recognition on their own. What they do is they take a data set that's actually been sort of people have tagged the data set as being, okay, here's a picture of this, and here's how to interpret it. Here's a picture of this and how to interpret it. And you need a big data set like that. You train the machine on this data set. Now it kind of extrapolates the pattern. It learns the basic principles of the pattern, and you feed it another image or another string of text, and it'll give you back pretty much like it's a predictive thing, and it doesn't always get it right. That's the thing, is it's got it'll give you back a rating and a confidence rating on how it assesses it. So, for example, just kind of like the middle image was a woman on a period, right? And say that you trained this machine learning algorithm to pick up images of women having a period, and
it was an artistic project by actually Canadian-based artist and poet Rupi Kaur, which I think became really also kind of like voiced on the internet about that. So,
so if you fed it a new image, then it would give you back a statement. Yes, this is a woman having a period, and it's that we're 90%. This algorithm's 90% sure that that's true, but there's a 10% error range of error. So basically, they don't tell you anything definitively, but they give you a system for maybe flagging certain things with a relative degree of confidence. There's a couple issues. One is that it's trained on a data set, whatever people interpreted images, however they interpreted them, the machine will learn to interpret them the same way as the people did. So it can actually perpetuate biases, human bias, rather than being so-called objective,
Yeah, exactly, because we usually promise or like think about algorithms or AI as an objective, very machine-oriented kind of mechanism, but actually those are built by the bias of their builders, and those are learning through those biases. So whatever it's fed, it's like making judgments based on those feedings.
I love thinking of this in terms of labor, like you were saying, and content moderation as labor, and the sort of, in these three images, you have this sort of continuum of one is sort of like this image is of the contractor at the Manila office of TaskUs, is just a sort of more straightforward form of labor, and then the algorithmic content moderation is, like you said, automation, which is I feel like that's a very straightforward way of thinking about algorithms, which often, like, if you're not working technically, it could be confusing. And then the really sort of the one in which it is this labor process is innovative is bringing this community crowdsourced content moderation. In the chat.
Yeah, in the chat we get TacFam mentioning how the use of CAPTCHA, so for the audiences, like when you're asked to identify whether this is a road or not, that's being used to train
That's
algorithms.
sort of like crowdsourced and algorithmic automated.
So although we're being asked to authenticate ourselves as human beings by identifying these are roads, we're in fact just trying to train robots to think like certain types of human beings.
That's a perfect example of how people and their participation online, people create value through every single little thing that they do, and that value is endlessly, limitlessly extracted and skimmed off from people, and a lot of that is done through that kind of secretive or kind of mislabeled activities of how they present things. They say, we're presenting you a game. Or for example, like the face recognition ones where they say, or turn your face, the app where they said, see what your face would look like if you were old, and everybody goes in and takes a selfie for this app, and then it turns out that they're training up a data set for a facial recognition company and like overseas on this, and only
on that
after the
note,
fact.
yeah, exactly. I wanted to have like a historical anecdote in relation to that, which is if you're familiar with the pseudoscientific techniques that was used even not too long ago, like a century ago, physiognomy and eugenics, they actually used very similar ways to so what is physiognomy is like assessing characteristics of a person through their outer appearance. And also eugenics is a science of improving human breeds by kicking out the bad genes. So they were used at points as like an actual scientific method. But what they were doing is that they were kind of putting faces, creating patterns for certain faces, saying that if that person has that appearance, so that they have a higher chance of becoming a criminal, for example. For example, on the left picture, queer physiognomies, they connected masculine characteristic to female offenders. For example, it was in a book in 1895, or the right one like touches on intersectionality of physiognomy, which is I can't read that, but as you can probably read it yourself, is that when like a person is Black or like they're indigenous, they have certain like features, and it kind of portrays them as a potential offender. So what I want to say is that you can see in the algorithm mechanism too, which is like, for example, this origin of the role painting by Gustav Courbet was taken down on Facebook and many times, or Venice Willendorf, which is a 30,000-year-old statue, right? That was taken down. There, yeah.
The middle one?
Yeah. And the recurrence of these, although like they apologize, Facebook apologized for that, they're happening, and you see like it's like a confirmation on like how these algorithms are functioning through that pattern recognition.
Yeah.
So that's that. Also, like, and the second thing I wanted to just quickly mention is the user or community flagging, as you yourself mentioned, is that how the labor works out in the process of content moderation, like how you're helping with the algorithm learning. So another feature or mechanism that these platforms mostly have is community flagging. So they use free user labor, and it's with this kind of logic where moderators can't be everywhere, but users can. So they use that free and voluntary labor, and that brings them economic values. Not only that, but also
well, and that's how they go about. That's one of their strategies for going about finding out which content is offensive to people.
That
too,
also,
right?
yeah, they learn what is the social norm, like what kind of things.
Exactly. It's all that idea of social norms is hugely important in this space, because what we've kind of realized is that the platforms, the only basically like content moderation comes down to in a sense, what's deemed acceptable and unacceptable, right? And so what is deemed acceptable and unacceptable differs culture to culture, and yet we're seeing a predominantly American, what do you call it, kind of taste, American tastes of what's tasteful, what's distasteful, basically exported globally via the fact that Facebook operates globally, and yet it's sort of a...
Another side of the coin is that it depends on really their, like, when we talk about the public, the brand image or whatever we talk about, like keeping more users globally, is that if, for example, something is a deal breaker for a government in a country, for example, in Saudi Arabia, for example, there was this search engine by Microsoft, like was offered in 2010. What they did is that they only made safe search available in certain areas where the government, if they didn't do that, the government would filter the whole search engine in the country. So, for example, what they did is that they filtered certain keywords that it would show you nothing, no results. For example, you type in breast, you get nothing. You type in chicken breast, you get nothing. So it kind of shows how if they see the potential for like losing a massive amount of potential users, they would adhere to certain norms or certain
norms. Just one second. Jonathan, did you?
I was just thinking of like who the parties who are sort of the norms are being defined by, and it sounds like it's either like a sort of like idea of who their customers are, or if you want to call it their users customers, because it sounds like the way the legal framework is set up is so that it's like it's really supporting that sort of like consumer platform or customer platform relationship, and so it's just the sort of ambiguous will of like what they think their users want, or else like whatever the state wants, where they have access, are seeking access to a new market.
Exactly.
Those are big, those are some of the big factors.
Exactly. And we're mainly right now talking about the commercial content moderation, and so the motives are different. And then the last, but not least, is about the commercial content moderation workers, which until recently it's been really unknown to the public. I really recommend watching this documentary called The Cleaners.
I'll link it in the chat for people.
Yes, please. And we have a list of suggested readings or to watch stuff too, if you're interested. So I want to read this quote by a former moderator for Facebook. Most of these moderators, they are based in post-colonial regions, like for example in Philippines. Like a majority of these content moderators, giving an example of Facebook, are in Philippines, like very underpaid, and because they didn't have a choice, they got this job. So this former moderator for Facebook says, think like that there is a sewer channel and all of the mess, dirt, waste, shit of the world flow towards you, and you have to clean it. So imagine these workers are sitting in front of the computer. They have to decide or judge whether a content needs to be removed or be ignored, about 10,000 images or more per day. So that gives them about maybe up to 5 seconds for each image to decide whether an image should be taken down or not. So those things that are usually flagged by the algorithms or the community flagging comes to them, and they have to do that. At times, so these are the waste content, right? Like metaphorical waste content, right? It can be pornography, it can be some terrorists, like, you know, the most traumatic images that you can see, they receive those things for us to have they call it clean social media. So I just wanted to kind of have another historical anecdote in relation to that, and seeing how the waste, like in a metaphorical sense, is not removed but actually displaced. When you think about it like through a global perspective. Sarah Roberts, which is a great researcher, especially focused on the CCM workers, kind of sees that historical relationship between the colonizer and the colonized regions. Like, for example, this is a map, the trade routes of the Orient, which shows a flow of things that between the colonizer and the colonized. She sees that actually how these are mirrored, these like relationships are mirrored in the way that data flowing in and out of the Philippines, for example, right now, today.
Were you commenting on that, John?
I said wow underneath my breath.
Mike didn't pick it up.
I feel it's it is.
No, I know, like, and I've seen these slides, and it still hits me kind of like it's kind of, it's hard to fathom, and I think it is so largely invisible, and that makes it all the important for us to digest and to process, and the fact that it mirrors even like the literal issues of waste, like how we were exporting waste to China and Indonesia and everything like that, and then they've changed the policies. You know, they have their own issues. They say, we're not taking this anymore. Take your waste, take your trash back. They stopped accepting those shipments, and then now Canada and the US, we have to figure out what to do with our own.
Imagine if we also have to figure out what to do with our own, like,
dirty
waste posting.
Yeah, no, exactly.
If it started seeping up back through the...
face ourselves and to face who we are as communities, what it is that we're saying. Yeah, really.
And so, like, kind of like connecting it back to its implications on the creative content, is that, like, when you see this process where this clear cutting of the content and lack of context for like, you know, these conditions that these workers are, you know, in, and the context they are in. So these images, lots of content is usually taken out of context. And that makes it really difficult for, if you're dealing with, like, you know, how much you can do within a few seconds.
Yeah, exactly. How much can you evaluate?
Removed from a cultural context, for example, to decide, like, there's so much pressure on that person, like, you know, how much they can think about that, like one piece that's going to be removed or not.
And those images that are like the kinds, if you think about it, these are, the the images that people don't want online, and the worker being forced to kind of digest these 10,000 times a day for very little pay is a exploitation.
It must be like
of a mental kind as
well.
Yeah,
it must be enormously psychically traumatizing.
Yeah, that's a definite factor.
Yeah, exactly.
But it also poses what you were just getting at, that it poses issues for the artistic community on the flip side, because the artistic community is maybe, as you say, busy creating content that challenges the binaries, challenges, steps outside of some of the lines, and one of the ways that that these artistic creations can be filtered is just according to whether there will be enough backlash if they do take it down or if they don't take it down.
Either way,
if you like, they can go either way on it, that they do take it down, and then like basically again, the fact of whether something's newsworthy, this very loose sense of whatever newsworthy is, this is the platforms, this is their measure for either keeping something up or taking something down. Basically, is there enough backlash in either direction for whatever action they take? So if they're leaving it up and there's enough backlash, they'll probably take it down. If there's something that was up and there's enough backlash, then they'll probably take it down. But basically, they don't necessarily have a mind of their own when it comes to content.
Well, the mind of their own is that, as we mentioned, like economic and it's
sure, but that's
driven.
sort of the same sort of thing as happens like in the investing world, where it's not necessarily considered ethical. It's just what makes money or not. It's just like
Yeah, in that case, in that example specifically, the structure that arises out of it, even if it is this idea of like, oh, will the backlash be is the backlash of leaving it up going to be worse than the backlash of taking it down, etc. That structure just like already privileges people who are already popular, artists who are already have a following, and so people will fight for their work, I guess, as it were. It's already a structure that is like hierarchical, like baked into the foundation of what that is.
Because it reinforces the existing norms, and it doesn't allow for this challenging of them, because the content moderation is according to like a society, and you've said this, that art, one of the roles of art in society is to move us forward. Like comedy, it's to challenge us and to make us reflect on things that are a little bit outside of the existing social norms, so that we expand and grow and make more inclusive the social norms. But if in the online spaces, there's no avenue for things that challenge the existing norms, because basically they'll moderate according to existing norms. Existing norms are their benchmark for taking down things. Then it doesn't necessarily allow for that proper functioning of art in society, right?
So given that note, I just wanted to kind of like shift our conversation to like just touching on how whatever we talked about so far connects with the mechanism of surveillance, and then how the commercial content moderation can be interconnected with the estate content moderation, even in democratic societies.
Just to double check on time too. We have till like half hour.
You
guys, keep going.
Yeah, go as long as you until you fall asleep. So it's up to
okay.
Just passing out in your chair mid power.
Because we're like taking you down. So
it's what we really like.
Yeah,
so as long as Feel free to tap out whenever you want, but we're good to go for as long as it takes.
And are you happy? Like you'll interject with questions or whatever. Like keep that open channel. So
yeah, I'll try. I will. I feel like too much, and we will go till midnight. So I'm writing some stuff down to talk about at the end too. So I'll try to tamp it down a bit.
And folks in the chat, think about those questions and send them our way.
Cool. So in relation to surveillance, I think I recommend reading works by Jonathan Penny. He's a researcher working with the Citizen Lab, if you've heard of it, based in Toronto. And so they really work on the issues of privacy, freedom of expression in the digital space. And he's really focused on the impacts of surveillance on expression and especially like self-censorship and how these two are connected. Especially with his research, he's given more quantitative evidence around that because he's found that there are lots of skepticism around that because it's a little bit more difficult or less immediate understanding the implications of surveillance on ourselves. And it's a very difficult subject to study because self-censorship is very difficult to study because it's a deeply psychological phenomenon. Through his research, he's given very interesting quantitative evidence that how the awareness of public sector surveillance leads to self-censorship and what's the implication of that, especially on creative workers and younger people, especially women. What he calls this effect is called chilling effects of the surveillance and through his studies, like he talks about the watching eye effect. I don't know how
did he term that? Did he coin that term?
Chilling effects. Yeah. Yes. I think he did.
You think so?
Yeah. At least he popularized it. Yeah. So there are very complex mechanisms going on through surveillance, and they can lead to certain things. For example, as I mentioned, self-censorship, and he also adds conformity, which is through the watching eye effect. When I am looked at, I behave like I think kind of like more of the theory background of that.
Well, that's interesting too, because conformity was one of the things that was coming out of the last one that we were just talking about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. The next one he talks about is intellectual privacy, which is being less willing to share content online and less willing to express one's opinions on certain topics. The next impact is misinformed public, because awareness of surveillance causes people to engage more in gossip, rumors and disinformation. And the next one is about marginalized voices, which is creating new barriers for participation of marginalized populations. So these are some of the concerns that he mentioned. And especially he emphasizes on that this concern for self-censorship is not only for creative workers and artists, but also self-censorship of the institutions. He calls it institutional. It's a difficult word. Institutionalization of the self-censorship. That these are the spaces that represent artist workers as major gatekeepers through which art can be seen. And then I just wanted to add a quick note at how, like, we can talk for hours about that too, with how the commercial content moderation mechanism can be intertwined with the state content moderation. For example, you probably heard of the NSA's, for example, acquisition of private data that was released by Edward Snowden in 2013, or the case of Cambridge Analytica Facebook, more recent. So these are just examples.
Well, and that was what Jonathan Pening's research was based on, that, or one of the ways that he collected data on that chilling effect was based on pre-Edward Snowden revelations and post-Edward Snowden revelations, and he tracked search queries, right? He actually looked at the prevalence of certain search queries prior to Edward Snowden's revelations and afterwards, and saw a decline in search queries relating to things that could be seen as like, oh, I'm looking at something kind of controversial or that kind of thing. So people get less inclined to. That's why it actually encourages rumor when you a rumor type rumors and gossip in this chilling effect environment, because people won't go through the systems which they think they can be surveilled, which most people, I think, kind of assume that, something like Google, people kind of know intuitively that some of these spaces online, they are just giving away their data, and they didn't have a problem with it up until realizing that maybe they should. Maybe there are problems, maybe there are concerns, maybe we are living in a state that watches us more than we liked to think, and that's in America. But we also have a similar agency in Canada that does an incredible amount of data collecting on us, and runs many of the same types of strategies.
Additionally, like you've said before, we're the companies that, like Google, that we use on the internet are all governed through the United States. So we're all sort of
filtering. Yeah, so you're like exporting stuff, like even as an international, you're giving your info over into the hands of an organization that in turn is giving your info over into the hands of
state.
The state or the NSA or what have you. So
that was the whole pushback around the smart city in Toronto, by Google. That was the main concern around all this data that will be given from the people living there will be directly going to a powerful US-based company.
Is this the Sidewalk Labs project?
Yeah, Sidewalk Labs, which is a subsidiary of Alphabet, which is the company that owns Google. So you see how there's even kind of there's an entangling, and you have to pay enough attention to the legal or the organizational structures at play. I mean, not that they couldn't hide it. It's public information, and basically, like, when you uttered Sidewalk Labs or Alphabet in Toronto during the time of Sidewalk kind of trying to enter the city, basically people replaced both of those words with Google, and they rightly did that, because it's a jurisdiction. Even again, jurisdiction is so important. And I think there's a Canadian-based research organization, the CG, right?
Yeah.
That's done really great research into data governance. And data governance actually, as it turns out, is a huge intersecting issue with everything that we're talking about, because we've taken for granted data governance because it's just taken us a while to learn the value of data and to learn that it's something worth governing, that it's something worth giving that much attention to, to realize, like, actually, let's take care who we give access to this. And
Right, rather than in the case of Sidewalk Labs or the Smart City Google Smart City project in Toronto, the best way that I heard it explained is it's as if it's sort of another way in which we are giving public money, like public, because data has value, and so there's a monetary figure. We're giving it to a company to take offshore, basically, in the form of like Google being able to put it in their tax havens, or at least take it out of Canada and put it in the U.S. So I think that idea of tying data together, people's emergent awareness of the value of data, you can see it from all these different aspects.
Data as currency, like data as a currency.
And the organization that I meant to mention was CG, which is the Center for International Governance Innovation. They are publishing, and they were a reference for you at points, right, in your research too, because of the work into data governance that they were doing, and then the smart city thing was starting to go on at the same time, and it was another interesting case study. And I think it's actually what lifted the research of CG into the public eye even more, because Canada actually became a hotspot. Like this was a huge thing internationally. Who will Google build this smart city thing with? People around the world had their eyes on this unfolding scenario, and CG, I think, took advantage of that to popularize or to share their research and to educate the public, which actually the public showed an increasing interest in being educated on the topic of data governance, and that has to do with provenance, like where does the data actually go and stay.
Which kind of will talk about like platforms versus protocols, and like the materiality of data infrastructure in relationship to the networks and data ownership.
And that's something we're coming to.
Gonna go quickly through this. So after all this, and just like taking all this like research, I became interested in kind of exploring what kind of artistic or creative approaches that are happening at the moment in the artistic community that are actually pushing back or pushing forward. This is a snippet of a work by Sarah Friend. So I kind of gathered like three main approaches as a way of as like an antithetical to these mechanisms of content moderation. The first one is thinking about artists as developers or co-developers of the web's infrastructure. So artists like Sarah Friend or Tim Choi, they've decided to develop their digital literacy and taking a crucial step in being involved in rethinking and creating alternative infrastructure. So really like focus on the data infrastructure, the internet infrastructure, its relation, its materiality, and question and revealing our limitations of communication and expression in the digital sphere. So,
well, it was so good that you brought this into like one of your streams of kind of solutions, because like from my own perspective as a developer and technologist, it's like I often feel like I know, and I think many developers feel this way, I know how to build things, but I don't know what I should build, in the sense of like what types of constraints should be imposed. Like if you left me to my own devices, I might not give it enough thought necessarily into what should be accepted, what should be denied, all the biases that I'm building into whatever software I'm coming up with at the time. Which developers, they just like to build things, and so it's like bringing the artists together into it.
Yeah, it's really exciting. Like we've collaborated with some of them in this, if you call it, approach area, and it's been really exciting to feel like collaborating with them and like kind of thinking beyond the current mainstream kind of network infrastructure, bringing more care and stuff, control, which is really cool. And then the second approach that I explored was the artistic gestures as a way of like activism against online censorship and surveillance, like artists like Zach Blass, Matthias Judd, Christopher Wachter, Hassan Elahi, Sokin Lee. They have focused on kind of revealing the invisible, which we were talking about, the invisible, the more like desensitized or like more kind of abstracted systems of content moderation and social control in the digital space. So I really recommend, we have a list of things to explore at the end, so we'll give you links to those so that you can explore for yourself. And then the last approach, but not least, which really excites me, is about the power of storytelling or changing narratives through technology and science fiction. Like artists like Scavenati, Erika Karamani, Mauritian Alahyari have found the power of storytelling and speculative fiction in changing the narratives imposed by, we call it, digital colonialism, which is a very powerful, because as we mentioned throughout the talk, content moderation deals with narratives. It's about shaping and reshaping narratives. So I find this approach really fascinating and powerful.
We have, there's a question I think that really in the chat that really would suit now, just sort of thinking about like alternatives, what we can do. TACFam says these big tech companies are the world now. Is it better to find a way to live with the situation, or to continue protesting until the next iPhone or TikTok gets launched? And perhaps these are some of the
more ethical iPhone or TikTok.
Interesting, right? Like the like it's kind of like thinking what's the. Well, we will talk about the decentralized web in a minute, but like we have these kind of visions around, like we want to create a decentralized Facebook, or you want to create a decentralized whatever, like, you know, and just think like in a very maybe limited way. It's like the same way of thinking. We're just changing the technology, like, or you know, the infrastructure, but like we're not changing the way you're thinking about those mechanisms. So yeah, very interesting comment. So now I would like Connor to kind of expand a little more like technical side of things, maybe for us as artists and curators, to think about like how data infrastructure relates to data ownership and hosting and networking, how it works, and protocols versus platforms. So makes it better understand the layers of the internet, or the layers of the digital space.
Yeah, and to the question that was brought up, I think it's easy to feel obliged into utilizing the platforms of the day to sort of like following, even if you know there's something wrong with it. Like, for example, similar to maybe driving a gasoline car, we all kind of know that driving a car, carbon emitting, coming out of the tailpipe, but do we stop? No, not necessarily, because we think that we live in a society where it's fully, you have to stop there's the gas stations, and that's the way that you have to resupply to get where you want to go, and that kind of thing. And it's a kind of equivalent in terms of infrastructure. Like online, we think that we're kind of obliged to utilize the platforms and the infrastructure of the day. But I think that they also want you to continue to think that you're obliged to use the platforms of the day, and that there aren't alternatives. Like, for example, it would be similar with the gasoline industry wanting to keep the population driving gasoline cars, and convincing you that electric cars aren't a viable alternative. And that would be similar to, say, the massive corporations that benefit from the massive numbers of people that live on and use their platforms, and they are so afraid of people leaving their platforms.
That's especially something felt by artists. I think, like all art, not just artists working digitally, but I think all artists feel pretty obliged to share their work on social media. It's like, seems to be one of the only ways to get, like, I don't know, noticed, or to get an audience.
Or it's an accessible version of advertising. If you don't have a budget to, send things out in print, you're able to like post, and it becomes another part of your job as an artist.
An obligation, like you said.
Yeah, exactly. And it can be difficult. There's certainly a tension between incentives to have what I think of as like reach, which the platforms definitely they sell you the idea that you'll get reach on their platforms because of their own large user bases. Like Facebook can say to people, there's 2 billion people on Facebook. So somehow that number is just so big that you get into your mind, I could reach 2 billion people on Facebook. We forget that there were other ways that content like previously spread too. Recommendations, just the fact that people recommend things to one another, and that it doesn't all have to operate within a single silo where someone can track every single share and spread and like
It can relate to the gossip protocol that you want to talk about.
Yeah, totally, because just how we've kind of arrived at this place where just in terms of infrastructure and the way that the whole thing appears to us and actually is in actuality, the internet's presented in some ways as kind of decentralized. We think of it as a network. It's described as a network. We join the network and that kind of thing. The word network is everywhere, and we think it's all a network, and we extrapolate that idea to be that the whole thing is a network. You and I, and we're all connected over the network right now. But it's not just that, it's that just the fact that just because there are many edges, like we're at the edge of a network and you're at the edge too, doesn't mean that it doesn't all run and connect over basically what equates to central pipes and central channels. The internet as an infrastructure has a backbone, has many backbones. There was this article that we kind of pulled up that kind of highlights this in a kind of funny way, which was that this Georgian woman cuts off, this was nine years ago, but this kind of thing has happened like since, and that kind of thing. Georgian woman cuts off web access to whole of Armenia. She's 75. She slices through a cable while scavenging for copper, and disconnects the internet service, access to the internet to an entire country for 5 hours after.
This is so cool. This reminds me of like 19th century labor action, like the Luddite movement or something, or when
unintentional
Luddite movement.
An accident, right? This was not a malicious actor, and so if you have a non-malicious actor capable of having such an incident as this go down,
it shows like the fragility.
It shows the fragility. It shows the centrality. It shows how we could lose access to one another easier than we think we could. In terms of the way that the networks are actually wired, and this is true. This same principle is true on so many layers as you look at the architecture of the internet. There are so many ways in which it is in fact centralized when many of us come to think of it as decentralized, in the sense that it's a big multinodal network. But on so many technical layers, from the actual physical wires to the protocols that connect us, there are so many points of centralization, so many levers that could be used to either shut it down or reroute it or all those kinds of things. And we find that this architecture of the internet is connected back to the power structures that form on top of it, such as the most valuable companies in the world today are the tech co's, right? Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, what do they call it, right? The big five. These are the most valuable countries in the world right now, and it's because, as we were talking about earlier, data has value, and these were the companies that got on top of that game and figured out how to collect all that data. Their warehouses, their data warehouses are extraordinary. And at this point in the game, we're all day to day giving that data away daily. And this is the thing where we have the sense that we're locked in, that there aren't alternatives. But the last few years in particular has seen a wave of backlash. I mean, there's a number of different backlashes against. They call it the tech lash, at least in my sort of world. It's the tech lash where we're going against. There's been kind of a growing realization, even in Silicon Valley, that Silicon Valley has gone too far, and Pegah and I twice, two years in a row, 2018, 2017, I think, or 18, 19, down to San Francisco in the middle of the summer, typically to what's called the D-Web. One year was a summit, one year was called a camp. And the D-Web camp in particular, and D-Web stands for Distributed Web.
The links are going to be at the end.
The D-Web camp in particular brought together what, relevant to this conversation, I feel, was a more diverse community, a more diverse group than the first one, maybe in terms of like artists and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Do you think so?
And reminiscent of the whole Earth catalog kind of movement. Kind of like, it feels like it's going through this loop where it's very interesting that it's again happening in the Bay Area, and like it's kind of like a reflective, like hosted by the Internet Archive, which I don't know if you're familiar with the Internet Archive. They try to archive the internet, like because like websites can be shut down and they can be removed and go to nowhere, right? So the Internet Archive really tries to keep them, as as documents of human creation. I don't know how you explain that, but
yeah, we talked a little bit about archiving digital art when we sort of initially talked about new media art and digital art, and it's like similar sorts of problems there that are, it seems like in a way it's inherent to the technology, but then also the way the technology is structured.
Yeah, the web can be in fact a very volatile medium where things pop up and disappear, and the question of longevity of art or anything is interesting in the digital space. The camp brought together artists, technologists. This kind of relates to that first stream that you mentioned of kind of like how do we deal with this this environment now of content moderation, or how do we foresee new opportunities for alternative architectures, for new ways of structuring the conversations that we have online, essentially, so that we can avoid the pitfalls of as artists and just academics and anyone having to abide by or deal with the convoluted and strange content moderation policies that kind of are going on in
relation to that. And maybe it would be interesting to kind of like point out the relationship between the content moderation and where the data exists, and the right to moderate content, and how that data ownership right relates to the infrastructure of that data.
Yeah, well, exactly, and that comes down to the fact that we do, most of the time we sign, like every day we sign a new terms and conditions thing, like of a new platform that we sign on to, right? And we don't usually read it and that whole kind of thing. But that's also because we've gotten used to the idea that that our whole sort of digital life or life online is kind of the whole idea of the cloud has been so popularized, and I talked about this in my workshop in the symposium, that at the kind of time when the idea of the cloud and like Dropbox and this kind of thing were going viral, and everybody was kind of getting on board because it revolutionized so many things, and I say, like, okay, fair enough, we fell in love with the cloud. We had kind of a moment where it's like, this is incredible. The potentials here are wild. in terms of like instant access to data from my phone as is on my laptop. These kinds of things kind of blew our mind a little bit, but it was less apparent to us where that data was now living instead. It was an abstraction, and this abstraction has become pretty problematic. The idea of the cloud kind of has become problematic. There's a saying that the cloud doesn't exist. It's just someone else's computer.
It's not a cloud. It's on land somewhere.
Exactly.
Right.
Metaphors are
There.
It's really
misleading
abstract.
metaphors. Like, why we should use the metaphor of cloud that has a physical, like, real existence, like somewhere.
It
in the
has to
world.
live somewhere. The data lives somewhere. It sits on some computer somewhere, and it sits. And the question of jurisdiction and provenance was really, actually, it's really important because which country it's in or that kind of thing affects which laws apply to the data itself. What can be done with the data once it's in that data warehouse, and that can be governed by the laws of the country that it sits in. But our network infrastructure connects us internationally, and we don't. Again, there's sort of a disconnect between our geopolitical framework even and the internet at a basic obvious level. The internet doesn't necessarily, in its natural way, care about national borders and that kind of thing. But in fact, national borders do still exist and have implications. And so anyways, the point here is that some of the people concerned with the massive growth of the big techcos kind of realize that a huge point of leverage is, in fact, where is the data hosted, who hosts the data, and even what is the architecture of that hosting of that data, in the sense that should it really be the case that my data, your data, and everyone else's data all gets pooled into a central data warehouse? How did we even come up with that idea and think that it's a good one? So that brings us to some of the alternative hackers, inventors, people interested in the whole world of peer-to-peer software. And there's a history to peer-to-peer software, kind of looking back to like file sharing and that kind of thing. People are familiar with peer-to-peer from its file sharing days, but peer-to-peer has come a long ways. And one of the things that is kind of becoming possible is this direct connection between my computer to your computer. And if that connection is possible, then, for example, if it's possible without an internet connection. So Pegah and I have two laptops here. So what if our two laptops could more easily connect with one another without the backbone to the internet, without assuming that it all routes through Dropbox and syncs through Dropbox X kind of thing? What if we have more direct of an interface between devices? And that's something that becomes possible when we deal with and develop when we develop protocols for computers via which that communication between the devices becomes possible.
Yeah,
And
explain it quickly.
yeah, a protocol is similar to a human language. It's a way in which human language is a carrier for us to communicate with one another, and a protocol is a similar thing for computers. It's a way that two computers, it's a shared vocabulary, it's a shared language and grammar that computers can use to communicate with one another, to pass messages, and to know how to interpret the messages that it passes between them. So,
and in this case, it would represent a more immediate connection between two computers rather than one that is mediated by a platform, for instance?
Yeah, exactly. That via the kind of open and free, a protocol is open and free in the sense that human language is open and free. No one controls all of human language. It's I have contacts who call this an unenclosable carrier. That's kind of a fancy lingo, but it's still a relevant idea in the sense that it's that it from a power structures perspective, it's important because it can't be intermediated. There's no room for an intermediary in a thing that allows this direct peer-to-peer thing. And language is peer-to-peer in the sense that we can use it with no intermediary. And so certain protocols can be developed that can allow the computers to talk with one another directly without an intermediary. And when we do that, we open up a lot of potentials because we actually open up an interesting, I mean, no one liked to have viruses on their computer and that kind of thing, but the actual idea of viruses, or not just viruses, but anything which basically transmits naturally or moves naturally through natural systems, like that a message that I intend for Pegah to receive, I write it into my computer, and my computer shares it with her computer directly without an intermediary. So as soon as it sees one another, and we call this message passing between computers gossip, computer gossip. And the idea of gossip is a built-in thing to what you see on the screen is these two platforms, which are built on top of a low-level protocol that I was just talking about called Secure Scuttlebutt. And Secure Scuttlebutt is a protocol that allows for this direct message passing, this direct replication of data from between computers and devices. So what happens is people kind of own their own data again. So the data that they create and intend to share in a social network, it lives first and foremost primarily like on their device. So they take on a new level of responsibility as well as a new level of power, or a different set of rights and a different set of responsibilities when they step into this world of peer-to-peer social networking, because we host our own data, and then that data is shared organically between computers. There's still a mechanisms for opting into or filtering, for example, familiar abstractions or metaphors, like from Twitter, like the idea of I follow you, and that means I'm interested in what the things that you share. So I'm interested in basically replicating to my computer so that I can read the things that you share. And now, actually, I'm becoming co-responsible for your data, or co-responsible, not necessarily for your data, but I'm co-hosting it. Now there's two copies of the data as it's been replicated and shared between the computers. So these are, on the right is Manyverse, which is a mobile app, and on the left is Patchwork, which is a desktop client. And these two different apps, they speak the same protocol. So if I was on my phone using Manyverse and Pegah was on her laptop using Patchwork, and I write a message into Manyverse, because these two apps are interoperable and use the protocol, Pegah will see in her Patchwork interface the content that I shared through Manyverse. This shows the type of sovereignty that we gain access to when we use systems that have kind of a different paradigm built into them. And yeah, I'm curious, like what.
Yeah, the links to these also are provided. We can include.
This structure, just to again put it in, or like sort of think of it as basically as possible. It sort of makes me think of passing notes in class, or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
Without getting caught, though.
No one to
Yeah.
watch
No one
to
gets
catch
caught.
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then so I also think about so we're sort of talking about content moderation. I guess, do you think that there would be less need for content moderation on platforms that are operating on peer-to-peer protocols because people are more responsible? Like there's this other I don't know if I'm trying to think of there's more sort of accountability or responsibility for the data that you're creating and hosting, and that the people around you are helping propagate. Do you know what I mean? Like, I guess it's just that the content moderation would have to be different, but I wonder if there would just have to be less of it because the network doesn't encourage the same sort of content as our current networks do.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very different different architecture.
Yeah.
And it kind of it operates as natural or personal social networks do, which is that you can actually change the settings and that kind of thing. But for example, the way that you can actually connect with a network of people and not just like the people on your local Wi-Fi network are the fact that when I follow Pegah, I also, if I want, I open up myself to the people that she follows, sort of friend of a friend type system. So it's kind of the idea that there's a natural kind of boundary around maybe my social network that has to do with my friends of friends. And so I'm not going to see anything from outside of that circle. And what it means is that there is no it's unlike something like Facebook or any of those platforms because no two people have the same experience or that kind of thing. Like everyone's experience is completely unique according to the shape of their social network. So it really changes what content moderation is necessary because for better or worse, you are kind of operating within a bubble.
Local
kind of.
Yeah. Like for example, in a natural setting, you would need to, like if you want to connect with a friend of friend, you would need to be connected with the friend first, and then connect with the friend of a friend. So that's how it's natural in type of communication, because you can't just like search, for example, whatever you want to search and see someone that has no connection to your network in a sense.
Basically, like I don't know on the level of like individual posts how it can kind of work in terms of content moderation, but on the level of like bad actors, or where you have like people like hate speech and certain stuff like that. If you've got hate speech operating within the platform, you can block people and that kind of thing. So you can still, this was very important to the Secure Scuttlebutt community, that people still, they actually coined, I don't know if they coined it or not, but one of the co-creators of this system talked about freedom of listening versus freedom of speech. Was a really interesting kind of flipping the thing on its head, flipping the whole question of moderation on its head, and saying we should be less concerned with the freedom of speech and more concerned with the freedom of listening, which is if I can tailor, if I can, I should be able to see or to moderate, in a sense, I'm my moderator in some ways. I need to be able to set the parameters of what's okay for me to see and not see.
So you can technically kind of like remove certain content for yourself. Like it wouldn't be removed for the others, but because the data is sitting in your own, of the network is sitting in your own device, you can have, like, without completely removing that data, you're technically removing that data for yourself. So technically that's how you, freedom of listening.
So yeah, you get to take down a post, not globally, not from anyone to see that post, which removes the need for some of the roles of some of the content moderator type roles that we saw earlier in Pegah's kind of talk. The whole question becomes a little bit more of a moot point because we realize that the architecture of these other platforms is so global, and the whole idea that there's only one copy of a particular post, it's very binary. The post is either up or it's down.
Because it's hosted through just one data center.
They own the data. But when we own the data and the data replicates or propagates or is shared, then it's not such a matter of taking it down, because taking it down is not really possible. Just removing it for yourself. I don't want to see this. I don't want to see this kind of thing. Yeah.
We have an audience question regarding models for decentralized Facebook. TagFam wonders if the platform OnlyFans could potentially be a model to envision a decentralized Facebook, as it's a community funded by its own users, and the transaction exchange between users in this creators and audience is somewhat transparent.
Yeah, I was just talking with Pegah about OnlyFans the other day as a kind of interesting example where you deal with a different content moderation. You deal with different issues in terms of content moderation within when what happens behind a paywall. Because again, it's kind of, we talked, I think, after that about both the power, the challenges and the opportunities of sort of, something like Twitter, where it's all about what's public. It's the public post. And Facebook posts can be public and that kind of thing too. And so they present their own challenges and opportunities when there's that public quality to them, because of course on the one hand you have to deal with the question of public interests. If it's a public post, there's the question of public interests. Should it be up? Should it be down? Should it what should we? Right?
Yeah, but then it also shapes the discourse of public interest itself, like by this monopoly system that it creates. So it's kind of like a feedback loop, right? So what is the public interest? But I'm shaping the public interest as a platform that has so much power. So that's like a chicken and egg kind of scenario.
I really like this idea of the protocols themselves more so centering like the listener, as you were saying, and like letting the person who's just like the degree of agency that it provides people in terms of doing their own content moderation, instead of having to like either outsource that agency to an algorithm or someone working in the Philippines, or even if it was like the state, for instance, and the state could decide what is, like, as is true on more like conventional broadcasting regulated by the FCC in the States or whatever, where that defines what sort of content is tolerable on a channel. There's a chance for like a lot of democracy in the peer-to-peer model because people are making that choice themselves.
Do we have any additional questions coming in from the chat? just to put it out there to get those final questions out.
Let me hide myself. We're on the screen.
Or yourselves, like, you know.
Oh yeah, wait. Let me look. I have a couple of things here. I have 2 pages. Actually, of things, but I'll see what's
Like he said, it would literally be midnight.
One. Yeah. Oh well. One sort of. Maybe I'll just. This will be the question. Is like. I feel like there are some interesting conversations about the idea of like socialization or nationalization of platforms, like there's a book that I think, and this is sort of more in the realm of retail sales, but there's a book called like the Walmart Revolution or something like that, that talks about how Walmart has already built these like sort of logistical systems that would be well suited to do some sort of to become socialized, that is, to become things that are meant to serve distributing goods to citizens instead of to consumers, like as a way to make sure if there was socialized food programs, for instance, in our society.
The channels for distribution already exist.
They
They're
exist.
Just privatized.
They
through
exist through
Walmart.
these giant corporations. So you can sort of imagine, and then so one of their arguments is like, oh, it's actually in a way, if a socialist government was to ever take power, it would be easy in a way because they would just have to nationalize this one company, and then that could help them do the distribution. And you could think of a similar thing with the huge monopolies. This is sort of a silly thought experiment, but you can think of a similar thing with the huge monopolies in tech, where like. If someone were to want to nationalize, like maybe if it was deemed that because Facebook, I think people have argued that and rightly, that Facebook is like a utility, or Twitter is like a utility, in that it is this sort of like public forum for our society. So
certainly during quarantine when you're not able to connect through any other means.
So because it's a public utility, maybe it should be run by the public, which in this civilization that we have, the public is the government or the state. So like, I guess, what do you think of this idea of this sort of like our conversation tonight sort of, in my mind, it sort of is going beyond that and saying like peer-to-peer opens up a solution that sort of pushes past what the state is capable of being and puts the power more into individual people's hands. But what do you think of this idea of like the nationalize, either thinking of platforms as utilities or like the potential for them to become a social good, either through nationalization or maybe there's other ways, legislation?
Yeah, it's an interesting thought to think about, like something like Facebook become like a nationalized property, like, or a government property. Because of the history it has had, like, and the way it's grown, like the way it's created and it's grown throughout the past couple of years, I don't know what the implication exactly would be if it just like is handed to the government, for example. Like, would that really serve the public good, like, by just through handing it to the government? I'm more a skeptical like in that, but as we've mentioned, is that like that the government and the commercial estate and the commercial content moderation, they go hand in hand, like, you know, to use the data that we give up, right? And I don't know if that much data is given out to the government, if that's the public representative, if that would be something good for the public, like having that much data about details about, like, you know, every citizen in the country.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the problems with the platforms, which is what you've been saying, a lot of the problems are baked into the structure the code and the structure of those social networks or social medias themselves. Rather, I think the fact that they are privately run by corporations, that also plays into it. But I think a very large part of it, like you're saying, is the structure of the thing itself. They're built to centralize everyone's data, for instance.
Right. Yeah, I think it's some of both. I wanted to mention there's in relation to that there was kind of another movement. There's someone named Nathan Schneider. I was looking it up, based in New York, who has promoted the idea of platform cooperativism, which is where basically like that all of the platforms, in a sense, or there's the potential in all of these cases where platforms have become such predominant forces within the society, that these platforms are actually ripe for cooperativism, which is where they would take on cooperative ownership structures, which would restructure them from being private corporations to cooperative structures, which means co-ownership, which means collective governance, which means the community. The user community is the owner community, and when the users and the owners become the same group, then you know that the user community's interests are going to be represented and taken fully into account. So there was actually a movement for a little while that didn't fully fledge or fully succeed, but for them to actually buy Twitter all out, because there was a moment, I think, where Twitter's fate was a little bit uncertain from the stock market's perspective, and because they actually sometimes at these companies too struggle to figure out what exactly Twitter in particular struggled to figure out what their monetization strategy was going to be. And while they were struggling with that question, they were struggling with the question of profitability, which led to whether the article says like Wall Street was uncertain whether about the future of Twitter. So that's another kind of like idea, and I think it is complementary to the fully distributed, fully protocol-baked kind of paradigm. It provides maybe a transition plan or something like that, or another alternative structure for dealing with the scope and size of the platforms that have,
Yeah, because the challenge is always going to be that those movements are struggling against these things that are born out of the capitalist system to be corporations.
Exactly. Yeah, they're filled with that mindset. So how do you create that transition?
And it was funny because companies like Uber and Airbnb were the so-called harbingers of the sharing economy, and the sharing economy was kind of like a brief glimpse of opportunity to have a society structured in kind of co-ownership or just totally revolutionized the ownership models, and instead Uber and Airbnb became monoliths themselves, and became intermediaries themselves, even though they claim to create a marketplace, a peer-to-peer economy. They skimmed all the value off the top of from the community. So again,
it's funny. I forgot that was I forgot sort of the word sharing economy. I sort of it seems so ironic, because everyone calls it the gig economy is more the word that's associated with.
It's been replaced.
Now it's called gig economy.
Yeah.
seems like a more apt description of at least what they've become. But yeah, far away from what the initial
That
optimism was
speculation.
about.
Yeah.
This was it's getting
It's
very
like 11
late over
o'clock
there.
for
Oh,
you
man.
folks. So thank you
this
so
has
much
been
for
like a
sharing.
fantastic conversation. Yeah.
So long, so much
For
good.
having us.
And that,
Awesome
I really liked your slideshow as well. The
Yes,
images you chose were
all
very
those
good.
links. So yeah, if you share them with me, and I will share the
They're in
links in
Yeah.
the Discord. So folks,
yeah.
there's a link. I'm
Okay.
trying to like accurately. Oh yeah, you're also in the Discord, so you could post them
Amazing
yourself.
call to action. Join the Discord.
Yeah, and as well, please feel free. Where can we find you? Do you have a website that people can look up for Sprillow?
Yeah, there are new websites coming soon. It's Sprillow.com, like SPRILLOW.
Sprillow.com.
Yeah, and we can also share it in the links.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So, do you need us to point you to the links right now, or
Well, throw them in the Discord, and the community will be able to get them. So, we're just checking to make sure we didn't miss any comments. But yeah, thank you so much, Pegah and Connor. It's been amazing to have you on with us, and I look forward to being able to check out everything further through those links that you'll be sending in the Discord.
Thanks for having us. It was amazing to have the chance to share and to talk with you. And
yeah, looking forward to more conversation outside.
Amazing.
engage a tough topic.
Yeah.
Okay, goodbye
so
to the
much.
streamers.
Yes,
we are
goodbye.
going out of
Wait.
stream. Goodbye.